Hello and welcome to .NET Conf. I'm excited to show you how to build a chatbot on Azure OpenAI using .NET 8. In this session, we will first demonstrate how to make a chatbot work with GPT-4, and then we will integrate our data, specifically a PDF file, and enable the chatbot to answer questions based on the contents of the PDF. This way, you'll no longer have to read through the pages of tedious text. Just ask your chatbot. First things first, in order to get started, you will need to go to the Azure portal and create an Azure OpenAI resource. If you are a first-time customer, you might need to get approval from Azure. Once the resource is created, you will need an API, the endpoint, and the model. Creating a model is very straightforward. However, due to time constraints, I won't be going through the entire process of creating an Azure OpenAI resource and model in this session. This is one of the models that has already been created, and the major things that we need to keep in mind are the keys and endpoints and the model deployments. So if you click keys and endpoints, you can see you have two different keys. You have the endpoint and the location and the region. And then we're going to move to the model deployments. Once you click Manage Deployments, it should take you to manage all the models you have deployed so far. You can see I have a bunch of different models, including GPT-4 32,000, which is 32K model. And in order to create a new deployment, all you need to do is select one of the models and give it a name of your choice. Once you click Create, you should be able to have the resource created within 5 minutes. However, we're going to skip that step for now. Azure OpenAI versus OpenAI. Azure OpenAI combines the advanced AI capabilities of OpenAI with the robust security and enterprise features of Microsoft Azure. It offers private networking, regional availability, and responsible AI content filtering. By co-developing APIs with OpenAI, Azure OpenAI ensures compatibility and a smooth transition between the two platforms. That's all I have for slides, so let's write some code. We will start with using the terminal and creating an MVC project with the name .NET Conf. Now I'm using Visual Studio Code as well as a Mac, but the same code should work on Windows. And then of course we will change the directory to .NET Conf, and then I will open Visual Studio Code. Now I'm using CI dot because I have two different versions of Visual Studio Code. But if you have only one version of Visual Studio Code, you could also say code space dot, and that should pull up your Visual Studio Code instance in the same exact directory. I would press yes to to build the assets and use Visual Studio to do that. And then here's a cheat sheet, a few different files that we will use as we go in the project. And let's talk about these files. The first file is the .env file, which is something like this. Now, we're not going to use env.txt, but this is just an example file to show you what a .env or an environment file looks like. And as you can see, we've got a few different values here, and we're going to use Kasten GPT-4 model. And all you got to do is add these values, your keys, your endpoints, as well as the model, and save it in the .env file. Now, if you are using just OpenAI and not Azure OpenAI, in that case, you would only need the key and the model. And the model name would be the standard model name like GPT-4 32K. Next, we'll go to packages.txt, and you can see we only have 3 dependencies, and I like to add all the dependencies in one file and then use a script to make sure that I'm getting all the packages. So in this case, we have 3 different packages, and as you can see, one of them is a beta version. So one of the things you may want to do is check if by the time you're following this, there might be an actual release. And this is my script in script.rtf, and once I use that script, I'll be able to download all these packages. And you always want to go check csproj to make sure that you got all the packages and the versions you needed. Thing noteworthy is that iText7 is version 8, and that's the PDF package we are going to use. Next, we'll go and create a chat controller. So I'll copy and paste the home controller and change the name, and of course the name of the controller as well as the file. I'll also go ahead and remove some of the code that may not be needed. And then we'll go to program.cs. The first thing I always like to do is make sure that my environment is fully loaded. So for that, I will use the package .NET env, and using system.environment, I'll make sure that I'm able to get the value of the key, the endpoint, as well as the model loaded. Now, if you have a different file name, which is not .env, you may have to pass the file name in the method. However, if you use .env, you can just say env.load and then get environment variable, and of course the key, as in the key value pair. In this case, that happens to be Azure OpenAI endpoint. And you can always make sure that it actually works. So once we print the endpoint after running the project, we can be rest assured that all three values are coming in. And right there we see kastenAIEast.openai.azure.com. So that's great. And it worked. Now we can copy this code and use it in the controller where we will be creating the functionality for our chatbot. Of course, I need all the three values so I can bring them in, the key as well as the model and the endpoint. We can also remove the privacy code because we don't need it. Now somehow GitHub Copilot actually knows that I'm going to create a post method, or it got lucky. We're going to create an async method that will get response. And that's just a plain response method, and it will take a parameter user message. Now one thing to keep in mind is that we shouldn't really call it get response, but I think that's acceptable for now because it's just demo code. Otherwise, for a post, which is HTTP post, the name shouldn't be get response. So now we're going to call OpenAI client and create an instance of it. And the Copilot is pretty close to the actual code. And now I can pass in the endpoint and the Azure key credential, which happens to be key. And we'll have to import the package, which is using Azure. Now you can see that somehow the Copilot thinks I will need a completion request, which is also one way I could do this. However, since it's a chatbot, what I'd like to do is create an instance of chat completions options. Now chat completion options work for GPT-3.5 Turbo as well as GPT-4. And we will pass in a few messages. The first one would be a system prompt, and that will be chat message with a chat role of system. This is a system prompt, and we can say a lot of different things, but we'll keep it very simple for the demo. One of the things we do when we have our different chatbots is give it a very detailed system prompt. For example, we're using Visual Studio Code on Mac, and make sure the programming language is C#, and that becomes a default prompt. The second one is going to be a user message, which could be something very simple like, does Azure have support for GPT-4? And we can also give it an answer as an assistant, because this is just a chat that we're creating, and we can give it any answer we like. Now by default, since the training of GPT-4 is dated back to 2021, it usually does not know that GPT-4 exists. So even the Copilot may actually think it doesn't exist. So as you can see, the answer it gives you, it says no, but it does support GPT-3. So that clearly tells us that it doesn't really know that answer, which is perfectly okay. However, we'll go ahead and say, well, it actually exists. At the same time, finally, we will add user message, which is a variable. And this is something we expect the browser to send to us after the user types in that message. You could have deleted line number 29 and 30, and this will still work, but I just wanted to show you a very simple chat completions option with just messages and max tokens. And this is a number, I would say a small number like 400 is good enough, because GPT-4 32K, while it's an amazing tool, it's also the slowest model. When you keep it up to 400 tokens, it'll work a little faster than usual. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is I always look at the source code and see what's going on behind the scenes. Here you can see we have chat completions options, and it has a bunch of change tracking list types or even dictionaries. And what does that really mean? If you've done Entity Framework Core, then you probably are familiar with change tracking, and behind the scenes you have an iNotify property changed, which is a class that helps you track additions, modifications, and deletions as part of your entities. And this is important to understand because behind the scenes, you would want some kind of change tracking to happen. As you can see in this code, what you have here is a bunch of messages, but these messages could be unending. Another thing to add is that if the max tokens are, let's say, just 200, a lot of your answers might be truncated. So, that is something over a period of time, once you play with it, you're going to realize why the token limit is important, as well as the max tokens are important. Now, for this particular 30-minute coding session, we're not going to get into that. The response is of type chat completions, and I will use the Copilot. Actually, the Copilot didn't get it right this time. It's going to be get chat completions async. That's because we have an async function, and it takes a model as well as chat completions options. And one thing to remember is it's going to take the deployment name in case of Azure OpenAI, and it usually takes the model name for OpenAI. And that's it. Now we have the response, and we will take the response value. And I think Copilot got it wrong again this time. So we'll change the value to choices.first and then message.content. And we can return this as JSON, and we'll call it response equals bot response. Next, we need to create an index.html in chat folder in views folder. And we'll start with creating a div, which is going to be an empty chat box where all the chat messages will be appended. Next, we will create an input box with an ID, let's say user message. This is where we will be passing in our prompt. And then we'll create a button that will have a function, send message. Finally, we will add the JavaScript we need to make the request happen. And in this case, the send message will take the value from user message input box. And looks like the Copilot is spot on. Next, we'll make an HTTP post call to the chat controller, and the name of the method is getResponse. And we'll pass in user message. And that's not bad at all for the Copilot. Now, a couple of things, we'll just keep it user message for consistency, and then we'll use data.response because That's the object that gets returned. A small correction, this needs to be data.response because that's what we're passing from the API, and we should call it cast an AI or the AI chatbot. Another thing, we may also want to add the user message so we have a history of what was asked and what was answered, and we'll call that user : just as a prefix to the message that's going to be passed. One more thing to keep in mind is you may notice that data.response is R with a small r, the response is with a small r, and here we have the capital R. And that's because .NET would automatically take care of it. It knows that JavaScript's going to be lowercase on the other end, and it's not necessarily lowercase, it's camel casing. And then of course we can run this application and see how it works. Next, we need to go to the chat controller and type in a question, like what is the capital of France? And you may have noticed that on purpose I didn't type it correctly, but that's something GPT 3.5 as well as 4 are capable of handling, and we got an error. Let's look at what the error says. Oh, we forgot the parentheses and the semicolon. We're going to ask the same question again and hope to get an answer this time, and that was actually fairly quick. So next, we should ask it something like, what is Azure OpenAI? Now, I asked this question because given its training, it should not be able to answer this question correctly, and that is correct, as in it does not know what that is. In fact, it's apologizing for the previous response, which was set by us, even though it was an assistant response. It was actually me coding in that response. So it thinks that Azure is a completely different cloud platform and OpenAI is a completely independent organization. And that's because the training is somewhere around November 2021. Now this might change by the time you use the same model if it has a different training. However, that tells you why we really need to have our own PDF or our own data work with GPT-4, because the training set is quite limited. So let's ask it something else that I think it should know, which is the total words in all the Shakespeare's works, and on purpose, Shakespeare was incorrectly spelled, but we got an answer which is 884,000 words. And I have no way to check if it's true, but it's pretty amazing that we got that answer very quickly. Now, another benefits of OpenAI is that a lot of these models do an amazing job explaining something. For example, we can ask it explain Docker to a 12-year-old, and let's see what it comes up with. Wow, Docker is like a magical lunchbox that can hold different meals, software applications, and all their needed ingredients, code, files, and settings, just like how you would carry your lunchbox to school with your favorite meal inside. Docker helps developers package everything needed for a software application into a container. Wow, that can be taken anywhere. Amazing. Now let's try what is .NET 8, and I'm pretty positive it would not have that answer in its knowledge set, and that was definitely expected. It doesn't think there is a version of .NET called .NET 8, and it's actually trained till .NET 6. That's also pretty impressive because it's November 2021. Now this is exactly why we need our own PDF. So why don't we go ahead and build the functionality we need for the same, and I'm going to copy and paste the same exact method and make a small change here and call it get response from PDF. And I would need to update the UI to make this happen. So the UI has been updated to get response from PDF, so it calls this particular function. We're going to use pretty much the same exact code to create an instance of OpenAI client, pass it the endpoint and Azure key credential. Here's a small observation that this time the Copilot is showing me chat completions, and previously that was not the case. Copilot's learning from my code what kind of code it needs to even prompt, and that's pretty cool because I didn't have to copy and paste any of that. Now that we are here, the thing we need to keep in mind is I have a data folder which has azure.pdf file. That's one of the files I had previously copied and pasted to my project. And just to have a preview of this file, it talks about what's Azure OpenAI Service. It also has the models available in Azure OpenAI Service, at least to the date of the documentation. And it also has fine-tuning models, and you can see there are 3 of those. And what we'd like to do is ask these kind of questions and say, show all the fine-tuning models that you have, and how do I get access to Azure OpenAI, compare the two, and also talk about some of these key concepts. And it's just a 4-page PDF. I mean, there's a couple of reasons behind that. We are trying to use a small PDF because I wanted to demonstrate that even with small data, OpenAI models do not need any training whatsoever, and it's going to work with it. It does not require big data. And number 2, we also have a token limit, and I would like to keep the PDF under that token limit. Now, usually I do not like static functions, but since we only have 30 minutes, I'd like to create a function called getText, which takes a parameter, which is the file path for azure.pdf, and we're going to hard code it. Next, we will use PDF document class from iText, and we'll create an instance of it, and it'll take a PDF reader for that particular file path. And then we'll create a string builder to get all the text in one string builder with a variable text. Next, we will loop through all the pages in the PDF document and then append the text together. Now this code might work, and this is something that Copilot is suggesting. However, I don't have the time to check if this is going to work, so I'm going to take the longer route and write the code that I'm more familiar with. So first thing I'll do is create an instance of PDF page, and this basically helps us get one page at a time. Now that we have a PDF page, we will use a strategy which is called iText extraction strategy, and that's just an interface. And we'll create an instance of simple text extraction strategy, which is the most popular extraction strategy, and it keeps all the text. And then, of course, we'll get the text from that page and store it into current text, and then append that text to text. Now that we have all the text from the PDF file, we will now return the text after closing the PDF document. And of course, we're going to have to do a toString because it was a string builder. Next, we need to use this particular function inside getResponse from PDF function and make sure that whatever call we make, OpenAI model is using only this PDF text. And that's kind of funny because I don't know why it thinks I'm on Windows when it's pretty clear that I'm on a Mac. But that's the Copilot code, and all we need to do is make sure we have the right path passed in here. We also need to make sure that we specify the PDF text as a variable, and that variable is passed inside a chat message. So first, we can remove a couple of these lines that we don't really need, and here is where we can specify that the following information is going to come from that particular PDF text, and then of course pass that entire text here. Now, one thing that we would not get into is token limits. I'm using 32,000 tokens, so I should be good with a 4-page PDF, but pretty soon you'll run into token limits. And that's something I would highly recommend you investigate or use Azure Search or some other tool to help you there. Now we'll move the max tokens to 1,000 and we'll have temperature equals 0. And this is something that's very important to understand. Temperature equals to 0 makes it become more factual. And temperature equals to 1 or anything close to 1 makes it more creative, which is where people complain about hallucinations, is actually being more creative. Temperature equals to 0 does not mean that hallucinations will completely go away, but it reduces it to the bare minimum, and that's all we can control. So if you want creativity, it will make up things on its own, and more hallucinations, you can go to 1, and temperature equals to 0 means very factual, and it's going to try its best to stay there. You can also add a system prompt that could be more detailed and put a lot of conditions and restrictions on it where it does not make up things, and those are definitely some of the techniques you can use. Finally, it's the same exact response that we had previously, and Copilot pretty much understands the response, and I can use the deployment model and then of course return the bot response exactly like I did last time, and then return the JSON response pretty much the same exact way. Let's run the application again and hope it works. We'll go back to the chat controller and refresh and ask it the same exact question that we asked previously, except we have a 500 error, and the error seems to be, that's the path. I think it should work now. We'll ask the same exact question again, and we're hoping that this time it read the PDF and is giving us a different answer. So I don't see a 500, so it looks like it's working. It might take some time. Oh wow, we got a very different answer. Azure OpenAI Service is a platform that provides access to OpenAI's powerful language models, including GPT-4, GPT-3.5 Turbo, and Embeddings model series. Not only that, it also talks about the key features of Azure OpenAI. Now this is amazing. So we have an answer that is not only right, it's actually very succinct, and that's something that GPT-4 is known for. By the way, notice I did not type which correctly, but the answer is perfect. It's the same exact 3 models that we saw previously that happen to be fine-tuned. And again, it's a very brief answer, gets the job done, and is actually pretty quick. So now, why don't we ask it something like comparing OpenAI with Azure OpenAI, which previously it thought doesn't even exist. That seems like a pretty good comparison. It's talking about how both of them have access to powerful language models, but there are also some key differences, and it also highlights them, like platform, security, and compliance, and other things. And what I like about this is it's got Microsoft Entra ID. This is something that was just released, or the name change happened to Entra just a few months ago. So we know for sure that it's going outside its knowledge set, and it's actually reading the PDF and giving us the answers. And that's pretty incredible given we did not train it at all. Now this is a great start, but this approach has limitations. To overcome these limitations, I recommend employing the RAG pattern, which is Retrieval Augmented Generation pattern, and use Azure Search along with the database of your choice, something like Azure Cosmos DB. Azure Search or Azure AI Search has vector capabilities and also provides a hybrid search where you could use the same capability that Microsoft Bing has. By combining these solutions, users can experience enhanced information retrieval accuracy and relevance, effectively addressing the challenges posed by token limitations in AI assistance. I trust you found my presentation insightful and engaging. Should you wish to stay in touch, please don't hesitate to connect with me on LinkedIn or follow my company Kasten for further updates and insights. Thank you and have a great day.